The relentless, golden Caribbean sun beat down on the docks of Nassau. The air was a chaotic symphony of salt, rum, and fish, a testament to the chaotic life of the bustling port. Elizabeth "Lizzie" Thorne, once the wife of one of the region's most feared buccaneers, now found solace in observing the commotion from a distance. The legacy of her late husband, Captain Edward Blackbeard Thorne, was a modest schooner, the Sea Avenger, and a loyal but disheartened crew. Since Edward's death in a clash with the Royal Navy, Lizzie's life had become a silent struggle. She was no longer the fearless captain's first mate, but a grieving widow, forced to sell parts of their last haul to keep her crew fed and the ship afloat. Her days were a blur of melancholy, searching for purpose in a world that saw her as a relic of the past. As she walked along the dock, a weak, dry cough made her stop. Underneath a rotting pier, a figure was huddled, covered by a dirty, ragged blanket. The shiver that ran down Lizzie's spine was not of fear, but of a deep, painful empathy. The figure was begging, its voice an almost inaudible whisper. "Please, help me, madam," the whisper pleaded. Lizzie hesitated, then approached. Something in the tone of the voice, a mixture of a plea and a command, struck her. With a mixture of pity and resolve, she knelt. "What ails you?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the blanket, her hand trembling slightly. With a quick but gentle motion, she lifted a corner. What she saw made a gasp catch in her throat. Below the filthy cloth was not a frail, old beggar, but a young woman, her skin a mosaic of deep, purplish bruises and festering cuts. Her face, half hidden by matted hair, was swollen and disfigured, her eyes barely visible slits. Lizzie felt a scream building in her throat. She bit down on her lip, a wave of nausea washing over her. The true horror, however, wasn't just the physical abuse. It was the complete emptiness in the woman's eyes, a vacant stare that spoke of a soul that had endured unimaginable pain. "This horror. This isn't human," Lizzie choked out, the words a whisper to herself. She looked up and saw her crew, a few yards away, looking on with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. One of them, a burly man named Silas, scoffed. "Just a beggar, Captain. We don't need to get involved." Lizzie ignored him. She reached out and with a gentle touch pushed the hair from the woman's face. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice cracking. The woman didn't answer. She only shuddered and began to cry, silent tears mixing with the grime on her cheeks. Lizzie knew she couldn't leave her there. She couldn't. It wasn't just about pity. It was about a deep-seated sense of justice that had been dormant for too long. This woman, whoever she was, had been broken, and Lizzie understood that pain better than anyone. "Silas, and you, Jack, get over here," Lizzie commanded, her voice suddenly strong and sharp. "Help me get her to the ship. We're taking her with us." Silas grumbled, but he knew better than to defy Lizzie when that fire was in her eyes. Together they carefully lifted the woman, who was as light as a feather, and carried her onto the Sea Avenger. As they laid her down on a cot in the captain's cabin, Lizzie noticed a small, silver locket clutched in her hand. It was the only clean thing on her. Lizzie felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. She was no longer just Edward's widow. She was the protector of a lost soul. This rescue was not just an act of kindness, but a reclamation of her own strength. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the deck, Lizzie knew her life had just taken an irreversible turn. Days turned into a week, and the mysterious woman, whom Lizzie had named Ela since she hadn't spoken a single word, began to recover physically. Lizzie and her crew, especially the kind-hearted Jack, took care of her, cleaning her wounds and feeding her small, nourishing meals. But the emotional scars were much deeper. Isla's silence was absolute, a wall of trauma she had built around herself. She flinched at every loud noise, every sudden movement, and her eyes held a constant, distant fear. One evening, as Lizzie sat by Isla's bedside, she decided to try to talk to her again. "You're safe here, Isla," Lizzie said softly, her hand resting on the small locket. "No one will hurt you. We're pirates, but we have our own code." Isla's eyes, for the first time, seemed to focus on Lizzie. A flicker of something, maybe understanding, maybe gratitude, passed through them. Slowly, painstakingly, she lifted a hand and pointed to the locket. Lizzie opened the small locket. Inside were two miniature portraits, one of a distinguished-looking man with a kind smile, and the other of a beautiful young woman with Isla's eyes. Written on the inside was a small engraved name, Adalberto Rodriguez. The name meant nothing to Lizzie, but the portraits held a familiar elegance. They spoke of a different world, one of wealth and status. Isla was no beggar. She was a noblewoman. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place. Suddenly, a cry from the lookout shattered the quiet of the cabin. "Ship on the starboard! Royal Navy!" Lizzie ran to the deck, her heart pounding. The sails of the approaching vessel were unmistakable. The Royal Navy wasn't just a patrol. This was a warship, and it was closing in fast. She knew they couldn't outrun it. They had to fight. "Prepare for combat!" Lizzie roared, her voice echoing with the authority of a true captain. The crew, though nervous, sprang to action. The battle was a whirlwind of cannon fire, splintering wood, and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The Sea Avenger, nimble and quick, dodged the worst of the volleys, but they were no match for the superior firepower of the warship. Just as Lizzie was about to give the order to surrender, she saw it. The flag of the warship wasn't the British Union Jack. It was a privateer's flag, a personal standard she had seen before. It belonged to Captain William the Viper Blackwood, a notorious privateer who had once been Edward's closest friend. A cold dread washed over Lizzie. Blackwood, a man who had sworn an oath of brotherhood to her late husband, had betrayed him. Edward's death hadn't been an accident. He had been double-crossed, ambushed by the very man he trusted. The warship was a trap, and Lizzie and her crew were walking right into it. As Blackwood's men boarded the Sea Avenger, swords gleaming, Lizzie fought with a renewed fury, fueled by grief and rage. Her crew, seeing her courage, fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves. But they were outnumbered. In the chaos, Blackwood's eyes met Lizzie's. There was no apology in them, only a cold, calculating victory. "Lizzie," he sneered, his voice low, "I'm sorry it had to come to this. But some opportunities are too good to pass up." Just then, a commotion at the back of the ship drew their attention. Isla, her eyes wide with terror, had emerged from the captain's cabin. She was no longer silent. "You!" she screamed, her voice hoarse but strong. "You killed my father! You took everything from me!" Blackwood's face went white. He stared at Isla, then at the locket still clutched in her hand. A chilling realization dawned on Lizzie. Isla wasn't just a victim of a random attack. She was the daughter of Adalberto Rodriguez, a wealthy Spanish nobleman Blackwood had plundered and murdered. Isla had seen everything. Blackwood had tried to silence her, but she had escaped, only to be found by Lizzie. The full weight of the betrayal hit Lizzie. This wasn't just about Edward's death. It was a deeper, more sinister plot, a web of greed and murder. Blackwood wasn't just a pirate. He was a monster. Lizzie's heart sank as Blackwood's men surrounded them. They had been caught. But as he looked at Isla, an almost manic glee returned to his face. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice a low growl. "Looks like I finally have all the loose ends tied up." Bound and gagged, Lizzie and her crew were taken aboard Blackwood's ship. Isla, now a whirlwind of hysterical fear and rage, was dragged along, her cries echoing across the deck. Blackwood was in a rush, a clear sign of his paranoia. He wanted to get rid of them all, to sink the Sea Avenger and bury his secrets at the bottom of the ocean. As they were led below deck, Lizzie's mind was racing. She had to find a way to save her crew, to save Isla, and to avenge Edward. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for justice, for truth. Below deck, the conditions were miserable. The stench of stale air and fear filled the small, cramped hold. Lizzie's crew, battered and bruised, looked to her for guidance. She gave them a single, determined look, a silent message. We are not defeated. Lizzie knew Blackwood's weaknesses. He was arrogant, overconfident, and he had a crew that, while loyal to his gold, held no true respect for him. He was a tyrant, not a leader. She also knew the layout of his ship, the Serpent's Kiss. Edward had spoken of it often. As the ship sailed through the night, a fierce storm began to brew. The wind howled, and the waves crashed against the hull. The chaos was their chance. Lizzie managed to use a loose nail to cut through her bindings, her hands a bloody mess, but her resolve was unshakable. She quietly freed her crew, and together they devised a plan. They would create a diversion. Silas and Jack, with their brute strength, would cause a ruckus near the galley, giving Lizzie a window to reach the armory. It was a risky move, but their only option. The plan unfolded perfectly. Amidst the lurching of the ship and the crashing of the storm, Silas and Jack started a fight, drawing the attention of the guards. Lizzie, a ghost in the shadows, slipped past the chaos and made her way to the armory. She had only a few moments. She grabbed a handful of cutlasses and pistols, and as she was about to leave, she heard it. Isla's soft cry. Lizzie saw her in a small chained cell. Isla was on her knees, her face a mask of terror. Blackwood, standing over her, was toying with a rope, a sinister smile on his face. Lizzie felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. She didn't hesitate. She burst into the room, a cutlass in each hand, her crew right behind her. "Let her go, Blackwood!" Lizzie roared, her voice a force of nature. Blackwood was surprised, but his arrogance quickly returned. "You're a fool, Lizzie," he scoffed, drawing his own sword. "You'll die, just like your husband." The fight was swift and brutal. Lizzie, fueled by grief and a righteous rage, fought with a ferocity Blackwood had never seen. She parried his every blow, her movements a deadly dance. The crew, now armed and emboldened, fought their own battles, taking down Blackwood's men one by one. In the end, it was a one-on-one duel between Lizzie and Blackwood. The thunder and lightning of the storm outside seemed to mirror the clash of their blades. Lizzie, her mind clear and focused, saw her opening. With a quick, powerful thrust, she disarmed him, sending his sword clattering to the floor. Blackwood, disarmed and cornered, looked at Lizzie with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Wait, Lizzie! We can talk this out," he pleaded, his voice a pathetic whimper. Lizzie looked at him, her eyes cold and hard. "You chose your path, William," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You chose to betray a friend and murder an innocent man. You chose to break a woman's spirit. There's nothing to talk about." She didn't kill him. Instead, she had him bound, along with his surviving men. She took control of his ship, a prize worth more than anything she and Edward had ever plundered. As the first light of dawn broke, the storm subsided. The sky, a brilliant mix of orange and purple, painted a new beginning. Lizzie stood on the deck of the captured ship, her crew cheering her name. She wasn't just Edward's widow anymore. She was Captain Lizzie Thorne, a true buccaneer, respected and feared in her own right. She walked over to Isla, who was now standing on the deck, looking out at the vast, calm ocean. Isla's hand was no longer a trembling mess. It was holding a small silver locket. She looked at Lizzie, and for the first time since they had met, she smiled. It was a small, fragile smile, but it was real. "Thank you, Lizzie," Isla said, her voice soft but clear. "You saved me, and you gave me back my life." Lizzie nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. She knew their journey was far from over. Isla had a new life to build, and Lizzie had a new destiny to forge. But they wouldn't be doing it alone. They had found in each other a bond stronger than any treasure, a friendship forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival. She looked at her crew, their faces beaming with pride. They were more than a crew, they were a family. And together they would sail the seas, their sails filled with the wind of a new era, an era of justice, courage, and a love found in the most unexpected of places. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of adventure and romance on the high seas.